Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and to everyone watching us from around the world. Welcome to the Arab Gulf Teachers Forum 2020. I'm Yunus Saif from Dubai One TV, and I'll be your host today and the moderator of our very special topic entitled Hybrid Learning in K-12. Now, we are living through very extraordinary times, and with extraordinary times comes extraordinary situations and challenges. Now, due to the current pandemic, many lives and norms have changed like we could never expect it, of course. Schools have been closed in many countries for a while and may remain closed for much longer. Those that do open their doors once again will be facing their own new challenges, given the safety measures implemented by their countries. Now, education systems are scrambling to come up with creative and innovative ideas to guarantee the safety of their students and maintaining the best level of education possible. For now, it seems we have to give up some things, and the right way to go is towards hybrid learning. Now, joining us today are four speakers who are experts in their fields. That is why our topic tonight will be moving to hybrid learning in K-12. Topics that we will touch upon will cover new trends for a seamless transition to hybrid learning. The second topic, of course, will be how will the integration of online and face-to-face learning occur? Third, how will students be supported to overcome the challenges that come with hybrid learning, such as time management, behavior, communication, and self-regulation? And last but not least, how to keep the quality of learning at its highest level in hybrid learning. Now, I would like to go ahead and briefly introduce our speakers who will present their topics for around 15 minutes each. First, I would like to ask Professor Curtis Bonk to start our domain. Of course, before we go to the domain, Professor Kurt will be our first speaker. He is a professor at Indiana University and is teaching psychology and technology courses. Our second guest of the day is Diane Ullman. She is an international accreditation leader in New England Association of Schools and Colleges, and she is also the co-author of Learning Personalized. Our third speaker of the day will be Daniel Sobel, who is the founder and lead consultant for Inclusion Expert. Inclusion Expert is a training and support company working in education. Of course, last but not least, of course, is Dr. Martin Brown. He teaches in the School of Policy and Practice at the Center for Evaluation, Quality and Inspection at Dublin City University, which is, of course, TCU, Institute of Education. And he's a specialist in educational evaluation and assessment. I hope I've given the right introduction for all our speakers. Ladies and gents, I would now like to start with asking Professor Curtis Bonk to start our first domain and talk about the new trends for a seamless transition to hybrid learning. The question that will be asked during the poll, of course, is, do you think transition to hybrid learning will increase the risk of learning loss, disparities in academic achievements? Professor Bonk, the floor is yours.
Hello. Thank you for inviting me in. It's been 11 years since I've been to Dubai or Abu Dhabi. I'm so delighted to be back in the Gulf region and to be with you today, or tonight in your case. I hope from this session you get a few ideas. In fact, I'll have a poll at the end to see whether you've gotten a few ideas or not from this session. But I'll cover two models that I've designed for blended learning or hybrid learning. So you'll walk away not only with two models, but with a free book, because I was told you need things that are free. So I'll provide that for you. Trends, they want me to talk about trends. One trend is best practice examples. In the United States, in Texas in particular, where a hurricane is coming right now, two hurricanes are coming right now, they have best practice examples on the internet, and these slides you can download at trainingshare.com. One word, trainingshare.com. You can get all the links that I'm presenting. They've got all sorts of cases that they're highlighting for blended learning or hybrid learning in schools today, elementary and secondary schools. So trend number one is best practices and supplemental resources, whether it's a website educating all learners for special education, inclusive education. This just got started 1 month ago, July 26th. So take a look at these resources that I'm alluding to here. The second trend that's happening is a lot of free courses to ramp people up, train them how to teach online, to train them how to learn online. In Canada, Contact North is providing lots of free resources with Athabasca University and others. The one course they have right now is called Learning How to Learn Online. Other people are taking these kinds of courses. They're learning online for free, like these youth, these elementary, secondary, middle school kids in Nepal are learning English online. So people are learning through free classes online, free supplements online, whether it's learning about climate change in the Caribbean or other parts of the world in MOOCs for a Cause, or the Khan Academy. Salman Khan created the Khan Academy for supplemental resources to help kids get through their algebra and geometry and English and whatever courses that they're taking. These are all free as well. So a lot of free resources are being provided. Trend number three are new models of education. And there's lots and lots of ideas coming out today for new models of education. And you can read about these. And this article in particular, when you download it, it has lots of tips to teach online. It has tons of tips and ideas, because today teachers are curators, teachers are consultants, teachers are concierges. There's many new roles of instructors, along with many principals for effective online instruction to create a learning environment that's engaging for all learners today. In fact, I'm creating a TV show, or not quite TV, a webcast show called Silver Lining for Learning. Every week on Saturday, we have a new guest talk about new models of education, whether they're coming from Africa or Italy or the Caribbean or China. Every week is a new guest. silverliningforlearning.org. The fourth trend I see is lots and lots of articles, tons of articles and tips. So many tips, my brain's going crazy keeping track of all of them. But one person who's coming on this week on Silver Lining for Learning is Caitlin Tucker. Caitlin Tucker is going to talk about blended or hybrid learning. She has 4 books about blended or hybrid learning. I have one book called The Handbook of Blended Learning. Everyone's starting to talk about blended learning, how to give students options, how to give them choice on their final projects, how to provide alternative assignments when students might be sick, or scaffolds, or tutorials, or job aids. We're trying to be more inclusive in our education, flipping the classroom sometimes, watching the videos first, then coming to class. And having polls in Microsoft Teams or in Zoom, breakout rooms. You have to do all these kinds of things to make these things, to make learning online engaging. My advice is don't look at online or hybrid as inferior. Don't apologize for it. Be excited about it. Online is actually often better than face-to-face. It's more, you can be more creative than face-to-face. You can be more authentic. So I have some tips in there in the opening here about how to teach in an online or hybrid environment. Give students checklists or routines to help them, guide them through their online classes. Give them advice about setting up their home environments, the technology that they have, how to get in through the passwords, how to interact with other students in the class. Always give the purpose and then reflect and debrief on how well that it went. Start slow, start supportive, start fun, and then build on that. Build on the successes. Have clear expectations that you've detailed or outlined. Respond to students pretty quickly when you assign something, grade pretty quickly so they get feedback. Students want feedback on everything they do in an online environment. So I have two models. One called the Tech Variety model that's free. This book is free at techvariety.com, right at the top there. In Chinese and in English, soon maybe Arabic. We're trying to get it translated, but tone, encouragement, curiosity, variety, autonomy, relevance, interactivity, engagement, tension, and yielding products. That's Tech Variety. So I'm going to give a couple examples that are low risk, low cost, low time examples in the Tech Variety model. Number one, for tone or climate, have introductions of the instructors of what they expect in the course, a video introduction, short, for setting the tone, a safe tone, and then maybe using Flipgrid or tools like Flipgrid for video, threaded video discussions. Have them discuss how they solve a problem, how they write their stories, how they would complete a task. Always have reflect. And with Flipgrid, it's a free tool from Microsoft that you can have students use. They have short video discussions. A second free tool is Quizlet. Quizlet has free quizzes on the web. You can create interactive quizzes for your class to take and get study materials online. So blended learning, having exams online, having discussion online, having introductions online. These are all ways to blend your class. Having a tutorial using tools like Jing or Screen-O-Matic to do a screen capture tutorial or demonstration. So number two is encouragement or feedback. Number one is tone and climate. Number three is curiosity. Have things in the news that students look up and find out about and report on. Articles they read, the research they read, the news that they read, new dinosaurs being found, whatever it is. Have online scavenger hunts where students find information. They find objects and report back. They complete lists. They have competitions with one another to find information on the internet, research. Number four is variety. You can build in variety through polling. Right here in Microsoft Teams, we're doing polls right now, or in Zoom, or whatever tools that you're using to give you feedbacks. Another tool related is Kahoot. Kahoot's a free tool for quizzes, having students create quizzes and they all type in the answers or responses, competitive quizzes online. This was built in Norway, and it's a free tool. Number five is autonomy, giving students choice, having on the wall, having a selection of choices of what assignments they're going to work on today. Students like choice. They like giving options, and they can pick which choice they want in a digital choice wall. I got this idea from a blog yesterday from Caitlin Tucker again. She has a number of ideas related to this. I have about 5 minutes or 6 minutes left. Number five is Jigsaw, virtual Jigsaw, having small teams and divide students up into teams, into small teams, and give each student a piece of an assignment, having one student watch a video, another one read an assignment, another one listen to a podcast, and then repurpose those teams, come back to their home team to report what they've learned in the breakout rooms. Have a jigsaw-based idea so each student becomes an expert at something else, and they're providing resources for their fellow team members. Number six is relevance and meaningfulness. One idea is to have students sign up to take a massive open course for free, whether it's in English or computer programming. There's a lot of such courses online, and you can provide students with the options to take such courses. They can also edit Wikipedia pages or wiki pages. Today, students in Africa are using Wikipedia or Wikifundi, another wiki tool, to write books, to write news articles. Number seven is interactive and collaborative learning. Having students work in teams to divide up their work. A free tool called Trello will let students organize teamwork, and underneath each card that's listed right there are a set of resources. As you click on the card, you get different resources that the team is working on, and teachers can track what the students have accomplished then. Also in number 7, you might have students discuss and debate ideas or negotiate ideas. Google Documents is a tool that we can collaboratively write things. There are other tools like Meeting Words and Now Comment that lets students each have a different color for their contributions to the group. And so you can see Now Comment and Meeting Words, and my color was green, as you can see. Number 8 is engagement. And engagement can be in interactive maps, where students might have history, historical links or geographic links, or do some mathematics related to time and distance. Using ThingLink is an interactive map creator, or using Google Map Adventures to have students connect historical information to the map, to the geographic place, whether it's a Van Gogh painting or the United States map, or a map of Athens, Greece, or something else. Number 8 is also engagement and involvement with interactive labs and simulations. The PHAT comes to the University of Colorado, has free simulations and games in motion, in physics, in biology and chemistry, little micro worlds. Number 9 is challenge and tension, challenging students to ask the highest level question, evaluation questions. There's a tool called Smile from Stanford, built by a colleague of mine. He has kids type in questions on their mobile, and Smile evaluates the level of questions. Smile can also generate questions at different levels of Bloom's taxonomy, if you will. Smile is Stanford Mobile Inquiry Learning Environment. It's from Stanford University. It's free. Number 9 is challenge. Challenging students on a topic to come up with information and stick it on a sticky wall, like little sticky notes that they would have in front of them, and take those little sticky notes, and Padlet is a tool with sticky notes on a wall. Number 10 is yielding products, having a final product. And for instance, having an animation, or designing a website, or a podcast show, or a documentary, or a song. A tool like Animator is a tool that will let students create animations or create videos. I have my students do a video project at the end, or a timeline. There are a number of tools like Timeline or Time Curator that let students create timelines. So those are the 10 principles of tech variety. Again, the book is free. 250,000 people have downloaded it. The other model I have, and I don't have a lot of time left, a couple minutes, is Empowering Online Learning. It also has 100 ideas in it. It's not free, so get the free one. It has my model, Read, Reflect, Display, and Do, or R2D2, where students might read something or listen to something like a story and then create a concept map around the story. Storyline Online is good for young kids, elementary school, kindergarten kids, to listen to stories being read to them. Open access journals, free science journals for kids, having kids explore sciencejournalsforkids.org and do research around that. Number 2 is podcast, listening to a podcast on women in science or climate change and doing an assignment around it. Or having students discuss reading articles in a Google document and then annotation, have a 2-column Google document where they have the text and then they discuss it in the second column. They paste on the left-hand side their answers, the keywords, the phrases. There are other such tools like Perusal and VideoAnt that let you do the same thing. Number 3 is animation, displaying your learning, like a YouTube video or animation showing COVID-19. Or the World Mapper tool. The World Mapper tool lets you visualize large data, like the trends with COVID by country here. And finally, number 4, having student work on display, doing something, having students do a podcast show. So Read, Reflect, Display, and Do is the R2D2 model. We divide the web up into 4 things that you can do. That's the way to blend learning, to do hybrid learning. Start simple with the R2D2 model. The tech variety model is a little more complex with 10 things that you can do online. Poll, who thinks they got an idea from this session? Definitely, definitely? probably, maybe, no. If you want to type in the chat window, if you got one or more ideas from today's session. We're at a jumping off point to the next presenter. If I could have everyone jump with me on the count of 3, everyone stand up and jump. 1, 2, 3, jump. 1, 2, 3, jump. 1, 2, 3, jump. We're not really sure where we're headed with this fall semester with teaching, with this pandemic. I hope you all have learned something to help you through the pandemic. I'm jumping in China there, you're jumping in Dubai. I cannot do this alone. On the count of 3, everyone can say with me, I cannot do this alone. I cannot do this alone. I cannot do this alone. Hopefully you got some things that you can do. My notes are at Training Share, my slides are at Training Share, my articles are at Publication Share, the free book is at Tech Variety, my email's at the bottom. I hope you all have a lot of ideas from the conference. Thank you again for inviting me in. We'll talk during the panel session. Thank you very much.
Professor Curtis Wong, thank you very much for your presentation. And as I see, it was we got a lot of response. And our viewers are asking if you could. You mentioned a few links in your presentations, and the viewers wanted to know if you could post them in the comments side on the right-hand side of the screen, I believe. So they would like to have access to the links that you mentioned, please.
All those links, I'll put some more in the comments while the others are talking, but they're all you can download my slides at trainingshare.com, archive talks. They're all in the talk. But I'll put more in.
Thank you very much once again.
Yeah.
We'll be back with you very soon with the other questions. Thank you very much, Professor.
Sure.
Now, our second speaker of the day is Diane Ullman. Of course, the topic that she will be discussing is how will the face-to-face, online, and other out-of-class learning activities be integrated into a single class, and the types of activities that could be used for the online portion and for the face-to-face part. I will leave the floor to you, and again, please, I ask our viewers to keep their eyes open for the poll that we have in the chat and to respond to them. Diane Ullman, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with everybody today, and a special hello to my friends in the UAE, and also special hello to my friends at Queen Rania Teacher Academy, many of whom are attending and presenting at this Gulf Forum. I'm delighted to be with everybody today. The title of my talk, first of all, it starts with the term adaptive challenge, and I wrote that because the challenge that is facing teachers today is not one of just a technical challenge where they have to learn the technology in order to teach online, but it's an adaptive challenge because they have to think deeply about what it is they do with their learners and how the learners respond. I also mentioned in the time of COVID and beyond, because good blended learning, good hybrid learning is something that we should be seeking regardless of the fact that we are in a pandemic. So I don't know if you're familiar with the phrase making lemonade out of lemons, but I think that's what we're about to do right now. There's never been a more challenging time for teachers to teach and learners to learn. We have challenges before us that are daunting and sometimes make us wonder if we can actually make it through. Some of those challenges are, how do we fit the existing curriculum into half the time that we have available? How do we maintain relationships with students, which are so very important in a time when we can't see them, we can't touch them, we can't make that contact? How do we engage learners in their learning, in their own learning? I have been online and watched so many online classes only to see hundreds of students disengaged, looking bored, sitting back and barely entering into the conversation of the learning. I think online learning can be that kind of disengagement for students if it's not done well. How do we assess student learning in this time when We can't do the kinds of assessments we're used to doing. We also need to step back and say, how are we going to really know what our learners have understood when they're not there with us? So we have to learn some new ways to be responsive to our students. It's not easy, but the future success of students depends on it. And if we're thoughtful, we can provide the necessary professional learning for teachers so they can take on this enormous challenge. But there's a need to change our current mindset about what schooling means and what learning means. I'm going to start with sharing something that many of you are probably familiar with, which is the 21st Century Learning Skills. This is from the Partnership for 21st Century Learning. These 4 components, critical thinking, communication, collaboration, and creativity, are the things that we should be aiming for. In addition to the content learning that students need, we should be thinking deeply about how to use hybrid learning to develop critical thinking for our students, how to increase their ability to communicate with each other, with adults, how they can communicate with others around the world. We also know from Vygotsky that learning is socially constructed. How do we help our learners collaborate with others so that they are gaining knowledge from their peers and from teachers? And so collaboration is an important skill, and obviously creativity. We are working with a generation of learners who believe that it is their role and their right to create knowledge and information. So how do we do these 4 21st century learning skills in an environment where that has changed dramatically for us? I believe that a blend of face-to-face and online learning is uniquely suited to developing these skills, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that. But it demands that we give students a larger role in their learning, and we give back some control from the teacher to the student. And it also means we have to prioritize our learning goals. Here are some of the shifts that we expect to happen in this. If we're going to bring these 21st century skills to our learners, we're going to have to do some things differently. The role of teacher is going to have to change from facilitator to from dispenser of knowledge to facilitator of learning. So that means that we call that co-creation. And it's the teacher working with students to develop a challenge or a problem, to clarify what is being measured, to envision products. And so teachers and students are working together to co-create learning experiences, which students can then do when they're on their own or online. Being a facilitator of learning means giving up some time to your students so that they can be the ones directing learning, and it means coaching your students, and it means supporting them in their learning rather than being the person who gives away all the knowledge. The role of the student, they can no longer just sit back in a chair and receive the knowledge. They need to create new knowledge. We're going, and as I said earlier, we're going from individualized work to social construction of knowledge. The role of the student in the learning process and a hybrid learning model can and should shift towards giving them opportunities to create knowledge and to have knowledge socially constructed. What we teach. We can no longer teach everything we need to know, so we have to think about what are the high leverage standards that we want to focus on and go deeply into. We want our students to move from being a passive learner of content to self-discovery and self-reflection. Who am I as a learner? What have I learned? What else do I need to learn? We want our students to be very aware of their role in the learning process and who they are in that learning process. How we assess learning is going to change dramatically, from assessing knowledge to applying knowledge in a real-life context and self-assessment. Applying knowledge in a real-life context means that students are given problems that require them to use the knowledge to solve a problem, to explain a process, to be able to bring something new to the table. And we also want them to begin to assess themselves as learners. And lastly, the use of time. From using face-to-face time or online time to teach content, to flipped classrooms, a workshop model, or project-based learning. These are 3 terms that have a lot of meaning. Flipped classroom really speaks to the fact that teachers are not used to deliver mundane content, but they are used to be able to help students unpack difficult concepts. The workshop model means that teachers might give a mini lesson and then allow students to practice what they learned in that mini lesson. And of course, project-based learning is quite important, and it gives students the opportunity to work on a project over a longer term than a single class or even several classes. So teachers, in order to do these, steps need to step back in terms of re-examining their role, but also re-examining what it is they're going to teach and how they're going to use the time. Here's some examples of what might happen in a face-to-face, online, and on your own hybrid situation. So in face-to-face learning, a teacher might be delivering workshop mini lessons, small lessons of skill-based lessons that students will need. They might also help students face-to-face co-create projects that they're going to work on, describe the outcome of the project, help a student make a plan. They might also check for understanding for difficult concepts. They might teach difficult concepts that are not readily accessible by reading online or reading an article or a textbook. And they might do some formative assessment where they can judge where students are in their learning process. The student role in face-to-face would be engaging in those mini lessons and engaging with the teacher as she's teaching a skill or a particular concept. They obviously would then be co-creating with their teacher. They would be responding to assigned material in the flipped learning model. They had been reading or learning at home, and now they're responding. And then they can be reflecting on their learning. The online portion of learning in a hybrid model, again, teachers are doing basically the same kind of information that they can do face-to-face. They might be using more of the technology tools that Curtis just explained to us. There's a wealth of technology tools that they can use to deliver mini lessons, to coach students, to check for understanding, etc. And in an online model, students are engaging in those mini lessons, and they're working with their teacher as coach. They're reflecting, they're seeking help where they need it, and they're engaging in formative assessment. The on your own time is where students, where teachers can make personal connections with students. We know that personal connections are vital for students to engage in the learning process. Teachers can take the on your own time to check in with individual students to see how their projects are going, to see what kinds of content they need to they're struggling with. So making personal connections is a really important part of the teacher's role in this hybrid model. If they're doing only part of the time face-to-face, they don't get that connection that they're used to. So use the on your own time to reach out to individual students. Students in their on your own time can certainly be working on their projects. They should be making connections with their peers and with their teachers as needed. They should understand that the on your own time is where they get their personal needs met, and they have to be thinking about what their personal needs are so that they can then reach out to a teacher or a peer and make connections, or they can simply use the time to forward their project. So these are some ways that the teacher and the student role vary in a face-to-face, online, and on your own hybrid model. This is one elementary school's adaptation to hybrid learning to address new learning goals and using prioritized curriculum. So in this model, the school is working on those 4 21st century skills of creativity, communication, collaboration, and they are working towards these as they are in blended learning or face-to-face learning with their teacher. So here the school, I'm not going to read all of the text on the slide, but you can see that Group A meets on Monday and Tuesday. Group B attends online. So face-to-face Monday and Tuesday. Group B is attending online both days. This is a situation where not all students can be face-to-face at the same time, probably because of the need for distancing physically from each other. So during those first 2 days, teachers are building knowledge and skills. They have one group, they have Group A before them face-to-face. They have another group sitting at home online, listening in, and perhaps asking questions as need be. Teachers and students are co-creating projects. Students can be working with partners on projects and so forth. Day 3 would be on your own. This is the day where students are given back time to work on their own. Oftentimes this is thought of as the 20% time that is present in places like Google, where 20% of the time students have the ability, or workers have the ability, to take on challenges that interest them, that motivate them, that tap into their passions, and they have the time to work on their own. Teachers can advise them on the projects. Students can work with partners, or they can work alone, but that day is for them to determine how to use their time. In working with some schools internationally, I've had experience where when this 20% time is implemented, the learning results start to increase dramatically because students are engaged and they're taking much more ownership of their learning. On Thursday and Friday of a given week, Group B is coming face-to-face with the teacher on day 4, and then they're online on day 5. And the same sort of pattern that I described earlier takes place. So there's opportunities to use time differently. Face-to-face time has certain functions that are particular to the face-to-face context. Online learning can be a repeat that, or it can be using the online tools that are so readily available these days. Thank you, Curtis. They can work on their own, which is essential for students to be thinking through their work. Engagement is really driven when students are given this opportunity to pursue their own interest and to work on their own or with partners. Those partners are sometimes designed by the teacher, but sometimes it's student choice. And so we can see where on your own, online and face-to-face learning can work together quite nicely. So what will it take to make these changes possible? When I said adaptive challenges at the beginning of this session, I meant that these are not easy changes to make, and they will require an open, inquiring mind on the part of teachers. This change of using these 3 methods of learning, this hybrid learning, effectively means that teachers have to step back and they have to think deeply about what it is they're responsible to teach. They have to identify the really most important concepts and focus on those, and then use the different kinds of time effectively. But they have to be open to rethinking what they do with their learners. This kind of open-mindedness is, if it's not there, then teachers will end up doing what they've always done, but probably less effectively. Teachers have to be committed to learning new skills, not just the technology skills, but the skills in terms of prioritizing curriculum, the skills of engaging students in different technology tools, the skills of interacting with students and teaching for creativity and teaching for collaboration and communication and critical thinking. Certainly a technology infrastructure that provides every student with reliable access to online learning is essential. And I know that most countries are still working to make sure that that technology infrastructure is reliable for every student. But if we're going to do hybrid learning, there is no way around it. We need that reliable infrastructure. And lastly, this challenge is for the larger society. Education policies that reframe the goals of education and the commitment to building new skills are essential. That education policies that reframe the goals of education to those 21st century skills, and the commitment to build those skills in educators, not only to teach those skills, but to coach teachers so that they can feel confident and comfortable using them with their students. Some key takeaways from this session. You cannot simply take what you've always done and do it in a hybrid model. I've seen that. I spent the spring watching learning online happen, where teachers, with all good intention, because they were just learning how to teach online, were doing what they've always done. And what happens is that the teachers are exhausted, the students are disengaged because online time as a steady diet doesn't really help them engage in learning. And so we can't simply translate what we've always done in a classroom to a hybrid model. We need to think differently. Teachers and students need to assume different roles in the learning process. I've described some of those, but it includes co-creating learning experiences in order to acquire those 21st century skills. Students are not just passengers in their learning, but they are active participants. We need to prioritize the learning that is of highest value and let go of the rest so we can teach for deep understanding. It is futile to try to teach everything there is to know. We have to decide what's most important. Students need opportunities to explore their passions and interests. Without that, it becomes the teacher just delivering information to students so that they can tell it back and the learning isn't deep. Teachers need to rethink how to use precious time with students to develop deep understanding, and here comes the hybrid model. And lastly, building relationships with students is a prerequisite for all of the above and so much more. In a virtual environment, relationships are difficult to build, but they are indispensable. We must spend time building those relationships. Thank you very much. That was my presentation, and I am open for questions.
Diane Ullman, thank you very much. I can hear my own voice. We have a few questions coming in, and I'll just ask you one of them for now. And then I will ask Mohammed to also let us know how all went and give us a screenshot of the responses from our viewers. Diane, we have a question that's asking, how can teachers handle an actual class versus an online class both at the same time?
So the technique is something that's called fishbowl, where I think the questioner is responding to the schedule that I showed, the 5-day schedule. So there are certain students face-to-face, it might be half the class, and the teacher is teaching those students. This is where it's possible to have students face-to-face. There's the second group of students that are listening in. They can pose questions through a chat, but the primary audience of that particular session is group A. So the teacher has a fewer number of students to really to teach well to, and then the other students are online listening in. Perhaps it's a Zoom class where they're listening in. They certainly can pose questions to the teacher that the teacher can follow up with later, but at that moment, there's half the class physically in front of the teacher, the other half is listening to the delivery of instruction, to all the activities that are going on, and then they can engage with their teacher either on the third day, which is the on your own, or when it's their turn on the second half of the week.
Okay, thank you very much for that answer, that clarification. And Professor Bonk, I'm going to ask you a question that was posted to me right after you finished. The question is, the big question that the viewers are asking is all about language barriers. How do teachers maybe and students overcome that language barrier that they have?
You mean English language barriers or any kind of language barriers?
So any kind of language barriers. Maybe accent barriers. Some professors, you know, might be have a different kind of accent. They might be an English speaker but have a different accent, where the student might not understand exactly what the professor is saying. I mean, in the face-to-face, he could keep on jumping in and asking questions and asking. Maybe in the online sense, it would be a bit more difficult.
So when you're not understanding the pronunciation or some of the activities, right? So
Right.
One way a teacher could solve that is by having an assistant in the class to handle questions from the students. So I often have that. I have 3 who've taken the course, and they come back to be my assistant. And they could get, you know, even high school students, even secondary students can make excellent assistants for that. And they're more in the peer group, as was just pointed out in Vygotskian research. The heterogeneous social interaction goes a long way. So having students who are closer in age, responding to each other's questions, they might feel more comfortable with them And so I have critical friends, I have email pals, I have web buddies, I have Google jockeys, all sorts of names for this, and that's one way to help facilitate the process. Maybe even collecting questions and concerns anonymously, having an anonymous Dropbox of questions where there's no name attached to it. It could be a wiki tool, or it could be commenting, could be a feedback tool that's anonymous feedback tool could also provide that feedback for the instructor that they're not clear in their presenting. And then another way is that often students form teams where they convert the instructor's presentation to another language, and that a support group, in effect, a study group. So you could form study groups or support groups. So on the one side could be the instructor assistant, and the other side can be student assistants. And another is to provide transcripts of the instructor's lectures. So having in Zoom, I know the lectures can be captured in a transcript and making that available to them. So there are a number of different ways that can help. I don't want to go too, I could keep going, but that anyone could write to me and I can come up with more, and I'm happy to share more ideas.
Professor, thank you very much for your feedback, and that makes a lot of sense. I mean, as time goes by, I mean, it's going to become easier and more clear to students on how to, be able to deal with such situations. Thank you very much. And now, before I go on to my third guest, I would like to remind my viewers that this is we're discussing topics that are entitled the hybrid learning in K-12. And in the Arab Gulf Teachers Forum of 2020, which is organized by the Ministry of Education of the UAE. My third speaker of the day. Sorry to keep you waiting so long. I mean, Professor Dr. Daniel Sobel, thank you very much, of course, for being with us. Now, Professor will talk about, Dr. Daniel will talk about how to support students to overcome the challenges that they might face in the hybrid learning, such as managing their time, behavior, communication, self-regulation, using technology, etc. All these different challenges that come with virtual learning or e-learning or whatever you want to call it. So, Professor, of course, the poll will be asking the following question, and our viewers we are more than happy to receive their responses on the poll. The poll asks, what are the most or the greatest challenges that students might face in the hybrid learning? Is it communication with teachers and their colleagues, or is it using technology professionally, or it might be, managing their time and commitment to study? With that said, Dr. Daniel Sobel, please, the floor is yours. Please.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
I've got I firstly just would like to start by saying how I've really enjoyed what the two colleagues before me started with. I agree with it entirely, and I think what's interesting is that even though perhaps the three of us who have spoken so far come from very different countries, different walks of life, different life experiences, we have similar conclusions. I'm not an expert in technology and in education, and I think this is relevant for this particular question. My expertise is more in what you would describe in the UAE as children of determination, and children with behaviour issues, social, emotional, mental health, and so on and so forth. And that's my area of expertise. And I myself struggled at school. I had undiagnosed ADHD, and I didn't pass grades at school. I didn't complete school, and I even didn't get a first degree. I have quite a few postgraduate degrees, and I've written various books and so on and so forth. But I really struggled at school, and my life's work is to try and make school happier for children. And it's possibly a useful context. I'm interested in where, let's say, for example, the most challenging and vulnerable children, how they might be doing with the hybrid model. No doubt you'll have a majority of students who will take to this very well and very easily. Firstly, they're a lot more fluent in technology than any of us listening to this podcast. And if anything, we're just trying to catch up with them. And secondly, you know, we are just trying to work all this out. Whereas for children, it's like a second language technology. It's just part of the way that they think and part of the way that they process stuff. I'm sure all of that is fine. Now, the question is, and I suppose where we're at as a profession is we're just trying to work out how we can maximize the use of all the wonderful technology out there. And I do think everything that's been said until now is absolutely fantastic. I think it's absolutely brilliant. And what a shame it would be for somebody to come along and say, yes, but I have a few yes buts. And I hope that this adds rather than detracts. The key issues which I've been asked to comment on are behaviour, communication, self-regulation, using technology, etc. I would argue that those issues probably, for any student who's going to be experiencing those issues, they're probably kind of already there. So that it's not like the technology might suddenly create a communication issue or self-regulation issues. It might enhance a problem which is already latent. And I'm sure that everybody listening, anyone who's a teacher and has been a teacher like myself, knows that there are, within your class, there is a certain percentage of children who are absolutely fantastic and can self-regulate and get on with things just as you set them work. And there are plenty of children who really struggle as well. So let's try and think about those who struggle. There is a key theme that runs through my books, which is about understanding the needs of the child and being able to address those. It may sound obvious, but I think I cite so many examples of where we make common mistakes and common problems, and perhaps I'll give you an example of this. There was a boy who was significantly behind in his maths, and the school wanted to give him extra maths. Now he came from a certain city in England where it so happened to be very hilly, lots of hills, and he had to catch a bus to go to school. It was interesting context because maths was period 1 every morning, was the first lesson. And when I spoke to him, I found out that the problem really is that he was behind in his maths because he was late to school every day. And the reason why he's late is because he's got 2 brothers and sisters at home who have physical disabilities, and he's helping his single parent mother take care of the children and get them ready for school in the morning. So he misses the school bus, and so he has to catch 2 non-school buses. I mean, again, this isn't necessarily relevant for Dubai, but I think you can follow the Dubai or UAE, but you can follow the storyline, because where it comes to is that the issue was that he didn't have a problem with his maths, he had a problem in getting to school. That was the issue. So what we decided to do was to buy him a bike. It didn't cost very much money. It wasn't a fancy bike and an exciting bike. It was a second-hand, cheap bike that he could actually cycle to school safely, and that was the simple solution. Sometimes in England and other countries in the world, we talk about this as a quite a dogmatic view of the hard data. We're looking for the grades and the achievements. We always prioritise those before looking at what the real needs of the students are, what the real barriers are. And what I'm saying to you is that sometimes the idea of using either technology or having a very strong curriculum can actually eclipse what's really going on for a child and what the real child's needs are. Interestingly, my personal experience here in this webinar is I'm just speaking to a blank screen. I happen to have my PowerPoint in front of me, but I find that quite difficult. And there's some people who find it very easy and very useful. It could be that you are sitting there taking furious notes, and those people who are listening to me thinking, gosh, this is boring. And I think what's common for us as teachers is probably going to be relevant for the children as well. There are some of us where this kind of technology is great, and there's some of us who don't think so. I personally like to relate to an audience. Whenever I'm speaking, I speak about 3 times a week, usually prior to COVID. I would normally have I normally like to not use a PowerPoint and take my microphone off and go and literally speak to the audience, and people find that very strange, but I personally relate to it, and some people really like it too. I think there are different approaches for different people, and what is the understanding or the explaining factor here is that we're all human beings with human needs, and those are essentially relational needs. So I want to draw on the root of the approach for what's worked in inclusion to help us understand how we could apply some of that, and how we could apply some of those practices into the use of hybrid learning. I should just say that in the past year I've launched 3 master's programs. One of them is in inclusion, and one's called is an international scholars program in inclusive educational leadership. I think there's close to 1,000 teachers from around the world who have signed up to it. So please get in touch with me if you want. I think there's a couple of hundred from the Middle East who are currently applying for that at the moment, and it's a scholarship program, so it's extremely cheap. So please do check it out, or you can just contact me afterwards. My team and I work with about 10,000 schools in training and inclusion. And these are some of the key principles that we work with, and so I'm just going to be drawing on those. That was my long introduction. I think I've just said that technology and certainly hybrid learning is excellent for many things. Predominantly, you can get a huge amount of what information. If you just think about how much has been presented already within a short period of time, there's a huge amount of information that's been provided, and it's tremendously useful. And I just thought, gosh, I'm going to make all these notes, but very kindly, people are providing links to things, and so it's just how much information we can share is absolutely fantastic. And so of course skills and practical skills and so forth are fantastic for doing in a sort of hybrid learning model. Where the challenges tend to lie are more in the whys, the purpose of things, relationships, the experience, the checking in, and so on and so forth. But let me try and illustrate through an example. There was a boy who was about to be excluded from a school, to be in England you'd say permanently excluded, and basically dismissed from the school. Whatever phrase in your country that makes sense. So the issue was that he'd made some very bad behaviours and bad decisions and so on and so forth, and the school really couldn't hold on to him any longer. And when I spoke to him in the head teacher's office, in the school principal's office, the question which I asked was there anything you ever loved at school? Was any subject that you ever loved? And he said science. And the head teacher looks at me and says, no, he gave, shook his head saying, no, he never learned, he never really studied science, trust me. But actually this is what he meant when I asked him a little bit further, what do you mean by science? How was it? What was the lesson? What was the topic? It was that topic where he got his fingers and hands in the soil when they were doing things around plants, and I think the science lesson was around photosynthesis or osmosis or something like that, and they got out plants and they were doing these sorts of things, and he just loved the idea of working with plants. And I said to the head teacher, well, is there any chance that we could get a bit of the field of the school, and that, as a reward each week we could give him something to plant in the field. And to cut a long story short, instead of this child leaving the school system and potentially going down a very dangerous path, he ended up in the end going to horticultural college and doing a study in plants and garden management and so on and so forth. Now, there is an example of something which would be difficult to achieve online, partly because the entire solution base was about firstly recognizing that there's an issue, and by speaking to the child and having that interrelationship with them, needing a practical space for this particular child. And I'm not saying this applies to gardening. I'm just saying that this is an example of what was needed here is understanding the child, understanding what this particular child needs, and being able to provide a space for it, both physically but also emotionally, and create a space for that child to be able to articulate what's going on for them. And that is something which is difficult to create for anyone in a hybrid model, really. It's difficult, or I should say it's easy to lose. And there are challenges there. I'm not saying it's impossible, but there are challenges. So I'd like to try and dig into this with some specifics. Here are some problems and how we can prevent them from emerging or happening. The biggest problem which I've seen in the last few months since COVID-19 is schools who provide lots of things to do, huge amounts of the need to be able to fill the time up with lots of exercises, activity, and there is, of course, with COVID-19, a struggle to how to maintain attendance, and not just of the children, but also of the teachers and their engagement with learning, and to provide things, and it's difficult. And the danger inherent to this is that we can end up asking children to do lots of things, but actually in the end they're not learning lots of things. And the resulting behaviours can be disengagement and lack of progress. So a simple solution, and I think actually most of the solutions that I've come up with have already been mentioned, so really just to reiterate these, is a sort of metacognition structure, both not just for the students but also the teachers as well, is, you know, how did I learn this and how did this engage me? Of course you could ask that as a teacher, is how did they learn this and how did this engage the student? It's essentially a sense check on what we're doing. Is this real learning or is this just filling up time? The next issue is around behaviours for learning, and the issue is more about self-regulation. Now, a student such as myself at school really struggled with self-regulation, so being overly reliant on myself to regulate my own learning, or to be self-reliant, would have been essentially a ticket to disaster. And what I've written down here is incomplete tasks, defined behaviours, predictably unreliable, or reliably unreliable is what I had originally thought to write. That's exactly what I look like at school. So how to prevent these from emerging? There is nothing better than praise. We all need praise. I need someone afterwards to say, Daniel, your presentation was great. And I want to just say to our facilitator, what a great facilitator you are. You're doing a great job. And I want to say, what a great webinar this is, because, you know, at the end, we're all human beings and we need positive psychological strokes. And so praise is going to help a lot. If you think, if I'm anxious, I'm uncertain, then I need reassurance by another to be able to say, you're doing well. Now, the other two recommendations here is do things more in a bite-sized way. And by bite-sized, I just mean, you know, don't be overly reliant on the technology to be able to take you through the entire lesson, but rather do a bit, reflect on it, do some more on the technology, and then reflect on it, and so on. And there's different ways of reflecting, as our previous speakers have mentioned. And finally, prompting. Prompting, scaffolding, intervening, and obviously there's this relationship between you want students to be as independent as possible, but at the other hand, you want to support them through being independent. So prompting, I mean, is a real interesting art and skill to it. It's about intervening as much as you need to without overstepping the mark. So I think by prompting here, it just means to making sure that the students actually know what's going on. The biggest failure point with children of determination or children with needs of any sort is the fact that they didn't necessarily understand. And having that inability to understand, you literally have nowhere to go. If you do not understand, then what are you supposed to do? Sit there quiet and pretend that you do, or you start acting out in different behaviours that sort of somehow indicate that you're clearly not following, you're not engaged. So those are the idea of prompting is more about checking in, more about making sure that you as the teacher know where the student, and then the key question which I ask to teachers is, and how do you know that they understand it? I think this is my last one. So just engagement, unenthusiastic and unmotivated engagement. What that looks like is that they didn't necessarily complete the task that you set. So there's some easy ways to prevent this, and some fantastic ones have already been mentioned. So I'm just going to add a couple here. Whether somebody has learned something or not doesn't necessarily have to result in a written piece. It can result in them making a video and then showing you through the video that they understood it. Similarly, you could use social media style posts, such as the Twitter style is essentializing the point in a very simple, limited amount of words, articulating what it is that you understood, or an Instagram style that you can articulate through a picture format. I think that most of the idea of motivating and motivating for engagement it relates to motivating in general students in general. It's not specific to a hybrid model or the lack of a hybrid model. It's a challenge which we have anyway, and the easiest way is to go with the strengths of and the interests of the individual child. So I'll leave you with one particular final story, which kind of, I hope, sums up the key points here. There was a boy who, again, was about to be excluded from the school, and the school principal asked the boy to come and chat with me, even though I don't like doing that so much, but I did it because I wanted to help the school principal out. And what the boy had told me showed me through his words what the real issue was. That the fact is that he told me that the one thing that he loves was football, which is a common thing here in England, probably all over the world. And the thing that he loved was Manchester City Football Club. Now, why is that relevant? Because we weren't in Manchester City. And I said, well, why is it Manchester City? And he said, well, that's the football club that my father supported. And when I picked up on the fact that he used the past tense, your father supported, and what he said was that his father had died. And through that brief conversation, I realized that here's a child who'd struggled throughout his school life because no one had ever supported him through a bereavement that still was paining him. And here was a child who was struggling at school just to attend school. He wasn't interested in school. His emotional inner world was hurting, and he didn't see school as being the solution to any of it, and if anything, it was part of the problem. So what we decided to do was to put in some emotional and psychological support for this child, and I decided this child had never been to a football match, so I decided that the school should pay for a football ticket to Manchester City to actually go and see, and which the school did. And actually, when I called Manchester City Football Club, which was the first and last time I've ever called a football club in my life, they were very happy just to donate a ticket. The point is not about football, and I'm not suggesting for a second that you should pay for tickets for your children to go to football clubs. That's not my point. My point is that it's about finding out what the real needs of the children are and working with those, and that is the key solution to all kinds of organizational issues, motivation, self-efficacy, self-regulation, and so on and so forth. Therein lies the ticket, and there isn't a hybrid model that can support that at this stage, meaning there is nothing that's online that can satisfy and nourish the interconnection, that human connection that we need. So all I'm simply advocating is that we bear that in mind and get that right and harness it well. I hope that's been a useful addition to this webinar series. I hope that's okay if we pause there.
Daniel Sobel, thank you very much. It's been your speech has been very enlightening, and it's enlightened all of us. And thank you very much for your input. Dr. Martin Brown, sorry to keep you waiting all this time. Hopefully, we won't keep you waiting any longer. Now, first of all, Professor Martin Brown will talk to us about how to keep the quality of learning in hybrid learning. Of course, it's something that everyone is concerned about, keeping the quality. And please make sure to answer the questions or the poll that will be popping up on the screen. The poll question asks, the quality of learning in hybrid learning context depends on these three following topics. Either the quality of the requirements like educational policy and regulations and technology, or quality of teachers and their ability to guide students' learning, or the quality of learning context and educational resources. I'm sure Dr. Martin will enlighten us and give us more information about that topic. Professor or Dr. Martin, the floor is yours. Please go ahead. Doctor, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now, and thanks very much for the kind introduction. So hello everybody, and thank you very much for staying actually and attending the presentation, and also to the preceding speakers who actually made my life very easy. Normally when you're told you're the last speaker, you begin to worry, but my presentation resonates very much so with our previous speaker. So briefly, where I'm from Ireland. I'm the research director at the Centre for Evaluation, Quality and Inspection at Dublin City University. And this is a country, as with almost all countries, that has witnessed profound changes in the way our educators and our students teach and learn, in particular at compulsory level education. So the challenge for me was posed, the request and the challenge was, what mechanisms should be put in place to keep the quality of learning in hybrid learning? And it's a great pleasure for me to actually talk to you all today. Although I'm in higher education for a long time now, I actually lived in Abu Dhabi for 5 years, close to a place called Shahama. And my first child was born in Abu Dhabi. So it's a great pleasure and an honor to be here again, speaking to you all virtually. So outline of the presentation and the slides and what we do, they're available on selfevaluation.ie. So a brief outline, background to what we're actually talking about, and to briefly put into context the system logic for what might be referred to as hybrid learning, but with a disclaimer that is the sustainable logic for hybrid learning, and ultimately to explore ways in which local, regional and system education level stakeholders can keep, but with a disclaimer, and Kurt and Diane talked about it as well, how they can actually enhance the quality of learning at what is referred to in some jurisdictions as compulsory education and in others K-12 level. So background, the pandemic upon us, most education institutions were to, with immediate effect, as we know, continue teaching, but teaching and learning via remote mechanisms. And this actually happened throughout our education systems and throughout the world. And between March 2020 to August 2020, roughly, at primary and secondary level in particular, it would be reasonable to suggest, if you look at all of the various mechanisms and reports from the OECD and other transnational organizations, And Diane touched on it as well. Many issues abounded, such as the availability of digital resources, the skill set of teachers and students to teach and learn remotely. It became part of the discourse and the narrative of most countries, and issues such as fatigue and all of that ensued. But quite naturally, we know that we cannot keep schools closed, and many schools now have moved towards this whole conceptualization and notion of, yes, we must open, but we must open with a disclaimer. And the disclaimer is that quite possibly and rapidly there might need to be a move towards what might be referred to as hybrid learning and hybrid teaching. And one can understand why if one looks at various jurisdictions. So for example, we have more recently in Central Europe, in some schools in Berlin opened. And of course, the pandemic actually hit upon these particular isolated areas, and quite rapidly in some jurisdictions, the schools need to stay open and they need to move to a mode of hybrid learning. And that is perfectly correct and right. But the question one must really ask is, and again, Kurt and Diane talked about it, is the COVID-19 pandemic the only reason why hybrid teaching and learning should become a common feature of our education systems? And although conceptually correct, is this in many ways a monofocal way of conceptualizing the true potential of hybrid teaching and learning during and after the pandemic? But one question one must always ask is, what do we actually mean by quality teaching and learning? Well, quality teaching and learning, it depends on the jurisdictions, and in some jurisdictions, quality teaching and learning is based on primarily actually numerical conjectures of quality in the form of standardized test scores. But in the modern era, and indeed in the United Arab Emirates, etc., when we talk about quality in teaching and learning, what we're really talking about is the learner experience, learner outcomes, and indeed the key skills needed for social and economic prosperity. And just thinking about Diane and David's and Kurt's presentations and the fantastic examples that they actually gave, when we actually look at standards related to what we mean by the learner experience, we say that the learner experience should be one where students engage purposefully in meaningful learning activities, where students grow, where students reflect on their progress, where students experience opportunity. If you think of these examples provided by our colleagues, you can easily see how hybrid learning can actually benefit this new mode of learning experience. When we talk about learning outcomes, we state that learning outcomes are effective in jurisdictions when students enjoy their learning. They are no longer passive recipients. They are actually creators of knowledge. And one can see again how hybrid learning can benefit from this. Students demonstrate the knowledge, skills and understanding required by the curriculum. Students attain the stated learning outcomes for each subject. Based on the examples given, of course, you can actually see, well, many can see how hybrid learning can actually, during, pre the pandemic, etc., be of benefit to enhancing these. And the key skills for social and economic prosperity, when we always talk about them, a rose is a rose is a rose, whether they are the OECD key skills or the 21st century key skills, etc. What we really talk about is managing information and thinking, being able to effectively communicate, being able to work with others, and being critical and creative. Can hybrid learning enhance all of these key skills? Well, quite naturally, if you look at the work of Kurt, etc., you will see, yes, quite easily and rapidly they can. So once we have a clear and agreed understanding of what effective learning actually is, well, I believe anyway, and many other educators believe, it is only then that we can explore ways in which hybrid learning environments can maintain. Now, initially the title was actually maintain, but hybrid learning can also, I believe anyway, enhance the quality of education provided in comparison to traditional classroom-based learning. But classroom-based learning, of course, actually has its place as well. So the answer to the question, well, the answer to the question is actually quite easy, really, for me. There's a phenomenal amount of literature out there relating to, and I might actually also add with varying levels of quality, to what actually constitutes effective hybrid learning more generally, but with a disclaimer. And all of this information is free, again, some with varying quality, some excellent publications by Kurt, etc. But the disclaimer is, many countries and transnational organizations, of course, have in place clearly defined quality frameworks and supports relating to what constitutes effective classroom teaching and learning. In Ireland, we actually have a document called Looking at Our Schools, where it clearly maps out what do we mean by effective classroom teaching and learning. But this might not necessarily be the case with hybrid teaching and learning. And one can understand why what a framework of standards wouldn't exist, because the absence of quality frameworks or indicators of quality, hybrid learning at higher education is actually becoming the norm, and it is the norm in most of the courses that are actually taught. But a secondary education, K-12 level is not. So one must remember the hybrid learning at K-12 level in most jurisdictions is a new concept for most schools and education systems. Quality indicators quite frequently are associated with accountability, and the saying is trust is good but accountability is better. So one can understand why it doesn't actually exist. And many believe that tightly bound frameworks actually stifles the true potential of hybrid learning, i.e. the creative aspects. And one must always remember that a framework is a framework is a framework is only a framework. On the other hand, in the absence of any quality indicators or frameworks, teachers might not be aware of what constitutes and/or is expected of hybrid teaching and learning. And teachers will understandably become confused with the plethora of information that exists on hybrid learning. And teachers, indeed, when we visit many schools around the world, we're always actually asked questions as evaluators. We are always asked questions. Well, how am I doing? How do I know? There is a there's the saying from the Scottish from the great educationalist John McBate, when he said, "How let schools speak for themselves. How are we doing? How do we know?" And in the absence of a quality framework, not a tightly based framework, but a loosely bound framework, it is very actually hard to actually determine if you're going in the right direction. So nearly done with the presentation, because I'm looking forward to the discussions later on. So as a starting point to keeping and enhancing the quality of learning in hybrid learning, well, of course, infrastructural resources, of course, unquestionably, there is a need to have in place the necessary infrastructural broadband resources to initiate and maintain hybrid learning environments. But one must remember, this phone I actually have in my hand, where I was tweeting earlier on, I bought this for, I think it was $60 or 60 euros in my jurisdiction, and you can actually do a phenomenal amount of hybrid teaching and learning with this small device. Somebody mentioned, I think it was Diane or Kurt, where they actually had Kahoot, and they had all of these devices, like I think we're using it today, Mentimeter. That can all be done in a hybrid learning environment using a very, well, some might say cheap instrument. So we need loosely bound indicators of quality hybrid learning. And there are many benefits, and but also pitfalls to educational borrowing. By that I mean there are many frameworks out there, but if you look at the history of comparative education, context and sensitivity are all important, if not essential, to effective teaching and learning. And it would be very dangerous to actually take an already existing framework from another jurisdiction and transpose it into your own without taking into account context and sensitivity. And if you look at the history of education more generally, a lot of jurisdictions that did this, they didn't do so well. So my real point is there is a need at both a system, regional and school level in your own particular jurisdictions to map out and agree looking at best evidence and practice, of course, what constitutes effective hybrid learning in your own educational context. And a key point, we must always trust schools and teachers. Teachers and schools, of course, should be provided with a safe environment to experiment and make professional judgments, of course, as to how hybrid learning can or cannot actually enhance the quality of learning for the various objectives or outcomes in their subjects. And if we have a very tightly, and it's all based on accountability, this will actually only result in a checkbox type exercise, which is actually futile. And most significantly, and I'm glad all of my colleagues touched upon it, hybrid learning in the 21st century, hybrid learning should not only be viewed as a temporary solution to ensuring that learning continues in the COVID-19 era, but rather as a powerful means of enhancing the quality of teaching and learning now and indeed in the future. And unfortunately, as an evaluator, I always have unpopular questions to ask or for you to consider. You might not necessarily actually ask them now or answer them now, but for you to consider yourselves. Is there a need to have in place a framework of indicators to evaluate the quality of hybrid teaching and learning in schools? And what might you consider are the benefits and what are the pitfalls? Another question, who should be responsible for setting standards for what constitutes hybrid teaching and learning? And there is the end of my presentation, and thank you very much for listening to me, although I went at a rapid speed of talking, but thank you very much indeed.
Professor Martin Brown, thank you very much. It was a pleasure having you with us. And I mean, things have changed so fast and at the speed of light. I mean, no one was expecting the classroom environment to change so much so fast. So we have one of our teachers asking you this question, and they want to know, the teacher asks, he or she says, I'm doubtful about the quality of education through hybrid learning. Yeah. How can we include inclusive education in hybrid in a hybrid atmosphere?
Well, actually, that's an excellent question, and thank you to the teacher that asked it. Well, one issue, I mean, teaching is so broad, but if I just actually think about the issue of language came up, and Kurt talked about it as well. There is a saying actually, and it goes somewhere. I'm going to paraphrase the saying, but teachers do always ask the question, how do I ensure that every student that walks into my classroom has an equal chance of learning, regardless of various criteria? And one of the criteria is language. So can you actually, my point is, can you actually, in the modern era, ensure that with all of the various differentiated abilities, etc., ensure that in a classroom environment of 30 children, how can you actually ensure in the didactic type of approach that actually quality learning takes place? And how do you actually ensure, the teacher says it's very difficult. Well, look, what you need to do is you need to start off very slowly. And what you need to do is you need to go to the research that's already out there, looking at Kurt's books, etc. Look at what actually is on these websites and say to yourself, and this is a really key point, how can, looking at all of these exemplars, how can hybrid learning improve or not improve? I mean, nobody is suggesting that you should only have hybrid learning or a digital learning. The confusion revolves around, should we only move into actual digital learning and throw out the bathwater and only actually have hybrid or digital learning? No, we shouldn't. But what you need both. Well, I personally believe you need both. So how do you ensure it? You look at exemplars, start slow, and do not be afraid to experiment. You have to be able to experiment, and you have to be able to, if your jurisdiction allows, make mistakes, but actually negotiate all of these issues with your students. You need to actually explain to your own students, what do we actually mean by hybrid learning? I mean, in some jurisdictions, they say, we are now doing hybrid learning, and the students are actually going, what's that? We don't know. So you need to actually explain to the students what the benefits of hybrid learning are as well. But start small and don't be afraid of mistakes. And with your own colleagues in your schools and in your regions and in your jurisdictions, map out and share the information among yourselves. But hybrid learning does not detract from the learning if it is done sequentially. It only can improve it. So that's my very long-winded answer, I might add.
Thank you, Professor. And before we move on to the next session of Q&As, I would like to ask Daniel Sobel this question. I heard from you that you're kind of person who likes to give that personalized touch to your students. Now that this personalized touch is not possible anymore, how do you make sure that you can get to them or get your message across as clearly as possible through the sessions that you provide?
Pick up the phone. I don't know if you got that. Did you hear me? Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah.
So my answer is pick up the phone.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
You don't have to do it right now, but yes, pick up the phone, call home.
Get in touch with.
Get in touch with parents, get in touch with children, speak to them, tell them that you think they're wonderful, encourage them, and so on. That is our second best.
That's the best way. Thank you very much. Now, before we move on to the next Q&A sessions from our viewers, I would like to remind everyone, and first of all, Mohammed, please, I would like to see the results to the polls that we have. The first poll, of course, was the question asked by the poll was new trends for seamless transition to a hybrid learning in K-12. Do you think transition to the hybrid learning will increase the risk of learning loss, disparities in the academic achievements? It was a yes and no answer. So mostly our respondents have replied by saying no, that they don't think that it will affect or increase the risk of learning loss or disparities. So there you have it. Would you like to comment on that, maybe?
I would like to comment on that. Is it all right to jump in here?
Please go ahead.
I think that there will be learning loss and disparities if we try to do what we have always done, but do it online or in a hybrid model. I think it requires rethinking our core purposes. And I just want to speak to something that Daniel said, which is there is no substitute for making that strong personal connection with students. Students learn for us when they know we care about them and that we are willing to try to understand who they are. And so that's one of the shifts. I think that there's much more opportunity for personal connection via online, via teachers working with individual students in a hybrid model than there is when a teacher is sitting in front of or standing in front of a large class of students. So I think that the answer is yes, they will if we don't change what we do.
Okay.
Professor, add to that, if that's okay. I guess that was in the first set of questions. I think it depends, as always. It's not a yes or no. It depends, and it depends on informed teachers, and it depends on planful teachers, and we have a society today that's aware of the issue and is more supportive of teachers than they've ever been, than society's ever been, because they're aware of the difficulties facing teachers in this COVID world. And so having a positive attitude as an instructor. I mean, Martin started pointing out many, many issues. You have to experiment. We have to take risks and try something and tell students you're trying it out. It may not work well the first time. I'm going to try it a second time, and tweak it and change it around a little bit. But inform the students of the purpose of what you're doing. Recruit their interest. If you recruit their interest and they get the buy-in and the motivation to try something out, positive things can happen. So it depends on how you set the stage for the environment. There's a lot of things that impact. Those are just a few.
Thank you very much. And the second question of the poll was asking, how will the face-to-face, online, and other out-of-class learning activities be integrated into a single class? And the types of activities could be used for the online portion and for the face-to-face part. I think we have the answer here right in front of us on the screen. And it looks like people looked at needing to practice in integration or integrating learning activities into a hybrid learning context. So they need, I think what they're mostly looking at is the practice aspect of the hybrid learning before being ready or prepared to go to the next level of interacting with the students. What would you like to say to that, Diane?
Yeah, I would like to say that the notion that it's difficult for some people is very predictable because people vary in their backgrounds and their expertise and experiences. So for some people, this is going to be quite hard. For others, they're going to be okay, but they need to be taught some technical skills and how to maneuver the technology, how to use some of the activities that they know are available. I need to practice integrating learning activities in a hybrid context. I would like to say, rather than just thinking about activities, I would urge people to think about what the goals are for learning. I mentioned, the 21st century goals. Martin also mentioned, goals from different OECD, et cetera. They're all about the same, which says that students need not to just learn content, but they need to learn those 4 C's, the creativity, collaboration, et cetera. So I think, yes, we need to practice integrating activities into a hybrid context, but if all we do is introduce new activities, then I think we've missed a huge opportunity to really rethink what learning means and to reshape learning according to some of those very important goals, and then attach the activities to those goals, as opposed to starting with activities, because then we miss the chance to think, I would say, at a balcony level of what is it we're trying to do.
Very true, very true.
Diane, I'm reminded of 20 years ago when the term first started coming out, that they said in 20 years, we won't need the word anymore. We'll just start calling blended or hybrid learning again. I think if you read this question, we have to, if we think about learning or learning environments, whether it's hybrid or whether it's mostly fully online or whatever, it's about helping students learn. And then we don't have to trouble ourselves with the terminology and the baggage that comes with labeling it as a hybrid.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, again, back to the history of education. When ICT came to the fore a very long time ago now, there was an obsession with actually showing teachers how to actually use the tool. But I mean, all of these tools really are very easy to use. I mean, they're designed to be easy to use, but sometimes there's more of a focus on the technical aspect, the actual how-to tool. I mean, I used to use a thing called the ZX81. That was a difficult tool to use, but they're ergonomically designed to be easy now. Like, I mean, really, where the creativity actually starts is actually taking this tool and actually seeing how you can actually enhance the learning. So I think sometimes there's too much of a focus on looking at what tool should we use? Should we use this tool? Should we use that tool? And that's not the way of looking at it. It really is actually, how can you actually use this tool to enhance learning, but in a very passive way. That really what we're talking about is actually good, whatever the term might be, good teaching and learning. That's really what we're talking about. But I think a key point is the challenge for many systems is to get away from this notion that hybrid learning is only there for the COVID era. It's not. I mean, if you look at the 21st century skills, the different terminology that's used, it's very difficult to actually teach. I'm just thinking about, I teach a class on quantitative analysis, God forbid. But I mean, in my class, I actually have engineers, I have linguists, I have people with various linguistic capabilities. It would be impossible for me to actually teach a class like that using traditional classroom-based practice. It can't actually happen. But with hybrid learning, posting information, putting up your actual lecture for people with actually language barriers, etc. I mean, what you can do with hybrid learning can really bring about the most important aspect of all forms of learning, which is parity of equity in education. And that is the most powerful aspect of hybrid learning, I believe, anyway.
And Martin, it provides a chance for reflection. Because you can go back and replay it, go back and reuse it. It's reflection that where learning happens. It's in the elaboration where learning happens. It's in explanations where learning happens. And,
Yes.
and you know, it's not how much should we blend. Too many people. How much should I blend? That's think about what you're trying to teach, and then decide how you're going to integrate the technology in. So there's no one factor or one model or the right approach. It's go ahead and try it out, and don't do too much at once. Start slowly and see what works and move from that.
Daniel, would you like to jump in and add something to that?
Not really. I think they've said it all. I don't have a huge amount to add other than, this question is an evolving question, isn't it? We will be in a different place in 20 years' time in the same way as we are in a different place now to where we were 20 years ago. So it's not like, there's a line that we're going to reach where now suddenly everybody has technology grasped in a certain way and can now integrate it in a certain way. I don't think that's ever going to happen. I think my guess is that it'll continuously evolve, mainly thanks to the wonderful colleagues who are speaking today, who put in a huge amount of work into this field and the evolving technology. I think there is an important element to this though, which is permission for teachers to try and permission to fail. And it's okay to try. Like, we will never evolve unless we are trying things, and trying things doesn't mean that we're getting it right all the time. It means actually that we have to be willing to go through a process of ourselves, which is, I admit, tricky. I've got my own little comfort zone. I like to use this technology, and I don't want too much. I'm not going to try too many things. It's a natural human thing to sort of be, let's say, I think the word is convenient, which is another sort of, word which may hide things like laziness, fear, anxiety, and so on. Especially depending on the school culture which you have, which can be quite judgmental sometimes. I remember being able to, even though I was never really, in all honesty, an outstanding teacher, I always managed to get an outstanding when somebody observed me teaching, because I knew what they were coming to observe, right? I could play that game, except for the day where all the technology which I had lined up failed me. And then I didn't get an outstanding. And so, of course, it's just easier. It was wrong of the person who was observing me to sort of, criticize me. I mean, the truth is I didn't have any sort of backups, and I didn't think on my feet well enough, possibly. But I think it's experiences like that, where you have fairly pressured school environments, can make teachers feel like they're not going to try things out.
Don't you think that also applies to students? Everything you've just said. Yeah, they need opportunities to take risks and maybe not succeed and try again and try again.
Yeah, absolutely. I do think students are perhaps more brave than we are. Meaning that I think that they're naturally more brave with technology than adults. I don't actually have any research to hand on that, but I just assume that they are, certainly based on my own children and me. And I think that a lot of my personal I'm a human being and I have my own personal limitations, so they get expressed into the sort of the technological field in this particular way. There's plenty to be afraid of with technology still. and not in real terms. Fear is, it's false. It's false evidence that appears real. It's not real, but it's just my own personal experience of things. And I think actually that's the biggest barrier for all of our teachers, possibly, is we're all just human beings trying to make do here. And it's the learning culture and the teaching culture that's going to determine how confident or brave we are. Anyway, having said I've got nothing to add, I've managed to rabbit on a bit. I'll stop there.
Well, that's why I talk about having a student assistant. So I have students sign up for every 1 or 2 for every week for 5-10 minutes of class as the cool resource provider. They're finding stuff related to that week's topic that I never found, that I don't even know about. So students are getting some self-worth and self-identity, teaching each other, not for the whole class, for a piece right at the beginning for 5 minutes or 10 minutes. And so they get identity. And I get resources that they found. So it's a win-win situation. And so whether you call it a Google jockey or you call it an assistant or you call it the cool resource provider, whatever, and you as a teacher, we have a lot of teachers watching this, have the comfort and support level too, because you have an assistant helping you out. You might give them bonus points, whatever you do. So it's just one approach in all of this. But the pandemic has caused experimentation. It's a given. So let's build on that. Let's build on the obvious. It's forced all of us to do something we hadn't done before. And by trying it out, the next time you become a little more confident in doing it. It's had a silver lining for learning. The pandemic has had, and that's why I've had the new show called Silver Lining for Learning. There's a lot of troubles, there's a lot of problems, but there's opportunities, and we have to focus on those more than the troubles. Focus on the opportunities, the possibilities, the creative capital that you're building within the class. I'll stop there.
All right, let's move on to the third question because we're running out of time. I think we got about 10 to 15 minutes more remaining. The third question that we sent out to the viewers was, what are the most or the highest or the biggest challenges that students might face in hybrid learning? And this is what we got. Communication with teachers and their colleagues. I mean, I think that makes sense. Please jump in and add to the response that we've received, please. Because, I mean, some people just, no matter what, they want that social interaction. Without that social interaction, they don't feel like they're being educated.
But see, here's the thing. With online and digital environments, you get more social interaction than you ever had before. You get more personalization, more of a sense of the other person. You can know more about them than you ever had in the past. I've been teaching fully online since 1997 and blended hybrid since 1993, probably before that. 3 decades. And I get to know my students a lot better in online environments than in face-to-face. I can't, touch them. We can have, physical conversations, but believe me, let's get over this issue of it's not as good at. It can be better. It can be, similar. The world is your oyster. It has all sorts of opportunities. I know this was Martin's question. I don't know if he wants to jump in on this one.
Yeah, no. I agree with you totally. I mean, we really actually have to look at what effective learning means and I don't like to use that term because it's overused, in the 21st century, but the way people communicate and the way people work nowadays is entirely different to the way we actually worked and communicated in the past. For most people, they actually went to a job, and the job was doing isolated tasks. That has now changed. If you go into any workplace environment, you have to get people working together, collaborating together, managing information, etc., etc., etc. I mean, hybrid learning, digital learning is fit for purpose for the modern learning environment. And I think if we actually take that perspectives, and I know it's not only about economic prosperity, but if we don't actually implement, without being eulogizing too much about it, if we don't implement a mode of hybrid learning very quickly, I really wonder how our students can actually function in the workplace these days. I wonder, because this didactic approach of teaching, it doesn't exist anymore. I mean, students get bored. We talk about, when we hear about behavioral problems in schools, and of course we know some people have unfortunate personalities, but despite the best will in the world, students do misbehave. But a lot of these behavioral problems are that these students are not learning in an environment that interests them anymore. I mean, we used to actually have a book in school, one book in school for calculus, and that was the only book we ever had. The other book we had at home was called Encyclopedia Britannica. They were the two books, and we held on to them. There's no point in me going along nowadays and telling a student that the history of Irish education they know they can get this information very easily. What they really want to do with this information is to create and to explore this information in hybrid learning environments. They do not want to regurgitate back as this term that's used, but it is quite true. They don't want to listen to the sage and the stage anymore. The power structures is a big problem. Power structures in education have completely dissolved. I mean, years ago, there was a good classroom environment. A good teacher was one where there was an entire silence in the classroom. There was no interaction. That doesn't exist anymore. Hybrid learning can actually really bring about that. And another thing I'm just thinking about as well, every single person that taught in a traditional class always remembers a student in that classroom that never opened their mouth, never said anything, kept completely quiet in the back of the class. The student would come up and they'd ask you this amazing question, and you'd say, wow, why didn't we actually why didn't you ask that question during the class? It gives a lot of students, when we talk about safety, it actually gives many students a safe environment to excel. And you really see that, and you will definitely see it in higher education. We see it quite frequently because hybrid learning is actually commonplace. But to see students that actually flourish in a hybrid learning environment in comparison to your traditional didactic approach, it's astounding. And I think people will actually see that if you experiment with it. And I think it's really good to see these students, above all, flourishing and coming up with very safe ways of interacting, whereby they're not sort of stymied by the other power structures of the students in the class. It's fascinating.
So Martin, can I build off of that? In my slides, I talked about the notion of social construction of knowledge. And it is one of the things that hybrid learning allows to happen in a better way than even face-to-face learning. And I'm pointing here to a book called Students at the Center. It's by Alison Zamuda and Benekalik. And what they say is that social construction means that students can build their ideas and relationships with others. They can theorize and investigate common learning goals. The idea that people learn through dialogue, discussion, building on one another's ideas is so fundamental to quality learning. That means that they're collaborating with their teachers, but also with their peers. Goes on to say that there's real power in feeling that you are not alone in learning, in that there's a sense of camaraderie that comes from collaborating to affect a change, create a performance, or build a prototype. So communication, I think we often think of between a teacher and a student. Here, expand that notion of communication to social communication with others. Our world is so small. Students can be communicating not just with the people who are in their class online, but across the world. They can solve problems with people from continents away. And I think hybrid learning allows that in a way that the didactic approach, which we've always used, simply can't achieve.
No,
I think the biggest challenge, is exactly what Diane and Martin are saying, is the teacher who still sees themselves as a credit manager, as a judge. If we start the teacher as a curator, teacher as a concierge, teacher as a consultant, teacher as a cultivator of learning, a teacher as a global educator, and the internet has a chance to enable your students, and my globe's upside down right now, to interact with anyone anywhere else in the world. So you can use tools that lets your students collaborate with students in Mexico or Nigeria, wherever the world. Endless things are possible today. It's so fascinating. And today we need to develop perspective taking. We need to develop social cognitive skills to take each other's points of view. The United States, a case in point today, we have huge problems here where people aren't able to take points of view and see and work with others. this is a new opportunity for that. That hybrid learning offers us so many chances to help us form collaborative bridges at the middle school, high school, elementary level that will serve them for life, that will help society in the long run. Please, if any teacher in here who's thinking about a new idea, think about having your students work with other kids in another country through this hybrid and pandemic age. It'll have long-term impact.
Perfect. Let's move on to question number 4, which is the final question of the that we asked our viewers. The question asked, how do you keep the quality of learning in hybrid learning? So how do you keep that high level of quality even though you go hybrid?
Well, I think that might be my question, and I think the question should probably, as my concluding statement of the actual conversation today, how do you keep and enhance the quality of learning? And that's a key point. So my own personal opinion is, do you need to know what good hybrid learning looks like? Well, yes, you do. You do. Do you need some form of indicators of what constitutes effective hybrid learning? Yes, you do, but not so much in a way that it actually stifles, without repeating my slides, stifles creativity. But who should actually set those standards? Now, that's a key question. Should it be the actual Ministry for Education, regional level operators, the school, the teachers? Well, as a starting point, quite possibly, as we go in August, it should actually be the schools that should actually try and work this out themselves as collaborators. But a dangerous point is, I often wonder, and I feel sorry when I go into some schools and you have one person in the school doing hybrid learning. So you actually have, for example, a student doing calculus in a classroom, hybrid learning, and then they go back into the next classroom 5 minutes later and they're doing classroom practice. So that becomes slightly confusing for students. And so what you probably need at a school level is, if you could, try and actually have a collective integrated way of actually, in a very small way, in a very slow way, introducing hybrid learning and build it up from there. Because, you know, the world wasn't built in a day. And the key point is you have to be able to allow teachers to be able to make mistakes. And Kurt mentioned it over and over and over again, and so did Diane and Daniel. You have to allow teachers to be able to make mistakes and experiment, and to allow students to make mistakes and experiment. And after this, I mean, what could actually possibly go wrong? So that's my final comment.
Professor, if you look closely at the screen, our viewers have said to them, it mostly depends on the quality of teachers and their ability to guide students.
Could not agree more. I mean, and that was part of my presentation. I mean, we actually have to really, at core, we actually have to understand, what do we actually mean by good teaching and learning anyway? I mean, that is key. And then what we do is we actually look at how these fantastic tools can actually enhance the quality of teaching and learning. But of course, one must remember, a lot of jurisdictions, good teaching might not necessarily be good teaching in my jurisdiction as it might be in another's. But by and large, we know that it is about the skills that Diane mentioned. But yes, of course, good teaching is good teaching. The tool is only the tool. Where the creativity and the innovation starts is actually by these good teachers anyway, using these tools. So yes, we have to actually conceptualize what good teaching looks like.
When there comes a day that a teacher who is asked the question, what is your job? And that teacher says, my job is to help students become critical thinkers, great communicators, collaborators, and creative thinkers, then we know we're making progress.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would like to thank all of you for your responses. Let me ask one final question that our viewers have sent. And with that, I think we're running out of time. As we can see, we've got like we can 2 to 5 minutes that we can use up. The question asks, how can we assess students and make sure we have a valid result? By that, I understand that what they're trying to ask is, how can we assess students and make sure we have the result that we want to see in our students or from our students?
I'm just going to give that a go, if that's okay. I think if we don't move from assessment of knowledge and skills, short answers, true, false answers, and we move students to applying their learning in a real life context, and we can do that when we're focusing on big concepts. That's when we can assess students using rubrics, but until we move in that direction and we're only assessing discrete knowledge and skills, we won't be able to do that well online, because students, they don't have, well, they have the opportunity to not tell us what they know that's inside of their head, but then to use others around them. Instead, what we want to know is not just do they have that knowledge and skill, but can they use it to do something important? And that means we're looking at performance assessments.
Anyone else would like to add before we conclude this session? In a one-line answer, please.
Sounds like Martin's area.
Well, one must remember that education should not be treated as an experiment where, like Boyle's law, where the rate of hybrid learning will automatically equate to production. It's not an input-output process model. It's more complicated by that than that. A lot of people actually say in various organizations is simplicity is what we desire, but we as educators is complexity is what we as educators perpetually deliver. And I think we should look at it like that. I mean, we're only at the tipping iceberg, and yeah, like but it's not an experiment. I mean, this whole notion about when people, I hear people talking about COVID-19 being the biggest educational experiment in the world. It wasn't an experiment. Experiments are controlled. I mean, hybrid learning should not be controlled either. It should actually allow the actual creativity to take place. So yeah, that's my final thoughts on the whole thing.
Daniel, would you like to add to that? Daniel, are you still with us?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, please go ahead.
I think I'll just add a dimension to that, because I think this isn't my area of expertise really, but I'm interested in one of the net results of good education is that every child would feel like they belong, and they feel like they can in their own way. And so I suppose there's an interesting metric that is possibly best assessed through peers. That peer teachers would perhaps observe, instead of the teaching, would observe children and observe whether they are engaging, if they feel like they belong, and of course speaking to the children and getting their feedback. I suppose that for me is the big assessment to safeguard throughout all of this process. I'm actually quite hopeful, aside from my concern of the, increasing dispersonal or unpersonal or impersonal, gaps that's emerging, that I don't think that we know quite what to do with collectively as a humanity, as we're distancing ourselves from each other more. But aside from that, I'm actually quite hopeful about the power of technology to help us communicate effectively and also to level up. For example, one of my children's best friends is, I assume he's autistic spectrum. I haven't given him a diagnosis, but I assume he is. But actually, his engagement over technology is far superior to his peers, and is not just a leveler, but actually gives him a huge advantage. And I'm quite hopeful for a lot of children with a range of needs, to be able to use technology to their great advantage. Anyway, I will end on that point.
Great. We've, ladies and gents, we've had a lot of feedback, a lot of questions. Of course, we've unfortunately run out of time. So, but please, one thing we've got from our viewers is they want your materials to be made available so that they can use it to, you know, revise it, learn a little bit more, go into more details, and they've asked for your contacts to get in touch with you for more information. You've all been great speakers, and it's been a pleasure. And with that, I would like to thank all of our speakers, our viewers, especially Professor Curtis Bonk, Diane Ullman, Daniel Sobel, and Dr. Martin Brown, and the Ministry of Education for making this session possible. Also, I would like to thank our viewers once again from around the world for participating in this session, and hope it has helped answer many of your questions. Thank you once again. Wish you all the best, and stay safe.
Thank you.
Once things
bye, everybody.
We'll be more than happy to welcome back to the UAE.
Thank you very much. Be well.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Bye.
Hey, everybody. We'll talk.
Bye.
Send me email. Bye-bye.
Thank you
Bye-bye.
very much. Have a great day.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure has been mine. Thank you.